What's going on, everyone? So I don't know if it's because the set is about to release or because there are already a little bit of leaked cards out there, but we have a ton of brand new cards over the past 24 hours to go over, and we're not going to waste any time and just start talking about them. If you want to pick up any of the cards shown here today, be sure to use my TCG player link in the description down below. Let's dive into the first thing that I want to mention, which is this post by FFG about casual play. And the only reason I did is because, well, there's some hyperspace cards in here and the store showdown card. So previously it was base window, you had the top 8 and then the top 4 and then the champion and the finalist. Well, it looks like that's going to be unrefusable offer in this iteration. They do the one store showdown card every single set, and this unrefusable offer looks to be it. So for those of you that are preparing for your store showdowns, as I am also, well, unrefusable offer is going to be the card that you're going to be acquiring if you end up playing in it and getting the top 8, top 4, etc. There's also a weekly promo of Lady Proxima, which is pretty cool, and well, there's going to be more over the course of opening all the weekly play promo packs, but we'll have to wait and see. On to the first card, however, we have a pretty sweet one in Frozen in Carbonite. It is a 3-costed upgrade in Cunning Villainy, attached to a non-leader unit. Attached unit can't ready, and when played, you exhaust the attached unit. This card looks absolutely absurdly powerful. This looks like an actual removal event or upgrade for your cunning control decks or even your cunning mid-range decks, right? This is similar to an entrenched, in which if you're playing a full control game, the downside of this is heavily mitigated, but even more so, this card is far better than entrenched, in my opinion, simply because you are actually able to maintain board presence when you attach this to an enemy unit. In entrenched, you give an enemy unit +3/+3, and yeah, they can't attack your base, but they will probably just murder any of your units at any point. But Frozen in Carbonite makes it so that unit can't attack, so they can still benefit from things that require, units to be played, like Overwhelming Barrage, for example. They can still Overwhelming Barrage your board, but they can't actually attack with any of those units, which is really, really powerful. So you could play something like Boba Green and play this at Boba Green and just remove one of your maybe units that potentially could have traded with their units, or one of your stronger units, so that they can just get in for more damage. And although Boba is, villainy and cunning, I actually think this is one of those cards where Boba's not going to like it, because you really want to get rid of units when you're playing Boba so you can use his action. Instead, I think this card's really, really solid in like Thrawn Control. You could see some potential Palpatine green or a Palpatine yellow, where you're playing the green ramp and then the yellow removal / tempo based cards. And well, Frozen Carbonite kind of fits perfectly in that deck, and also evacuate and all that other stuff. This card looks really, really good, and I'm excited to play around with it. Next up, though, we have Jabba's Rancor, and this one's pretty sweet, especially when we talk about the Jabba leader. Spoiler alert. That's going to be coming around here in this video. But 8-costed ground unit in Command Villainy, 9/9 underworld creature. If you control Jabba the Hutt as a leader or unit, this costs 1 less to play, and you get a when played / on attack trigger, or deal 3 damage to another friendly ground unit and 3 damage to an enemy ground unit. So this must deal 3 damage to another friendly ground unit and 3 damage to an enemy ground unit. It cannot deal 3 damage to itself, right? So this one's actually kind of interesting, because the way the rules state is you complete as much as you possibly can. And so, like, for example, in Death Troopers kind of version, if you look at Death Trooper, it says deal 2 damage to a ground unit, a friendly ground unit, and 2 damage to an enemy ground unit, right? And if we pull open the card here, I'll just show you what that looks like. 2 damage to a friendly ground unit, 2 damage to an enemy ground unit. And here's the rules. If Death Trooper is the only friendly unit in play, it must be chosen. But if we look at the Jabba here, or Jabba's Rancor, it's deal 3 damage to another friendly ground unit. So you actually can deploy this, and if Jabba's Rancor is the only unit you have in play, you can just straight up get 3 free damage to your opponent's ground units, which is kind of nice. And mind you, this is a 8 resource 9/9. And if you have Jabba, it's a 7 resource 9/9. These are some absurd stat lines. Most 8 resource 9/9s is, well, kind of not nearly as powerful, or 8 resource plays are not nearly as powerful in terms of stat line. However, if you compare this to like a reinforcement walker, for example, which is in command, it's the same resources, it has a much significantly less stat line, right? It's a 6-9 versus a 9-9. So it just straight up dies to Jabba's Rancor, but doesn't even trade with it. I still would prefer reinforcement walker when it comes down on 8 resources for the most part. The ability to deal 3 damage to an enemy ground unit is relevant, but at this point, it's probably not going to kill something. And usually when you're hitting this point in a command deck, you're kind of wanting to close out the game and make it unattainable for your opponents. And the way you do that is by healing and putting really big units into play. And reinforcement walker finishes both those kind of check boxes off, which is really important. However, this is a big however, if you're playing this for 7 resources, or maybe even less, which we'll get to when we talk about Jabba, this could be really powerful. Like, this is definitely in competition with a Darth Vader or a Maul coming down on 7, because you could actually kill something a little bit earlier, and it's a 9-9. That's such an absurd stat line and can deal with so many different things and survive, which is really, really impressive. Mind you, if you hit an enemy unit for 3 and then you attack another unit, so you kill that one, and you deal another 3 damage to that unit you already dealt 3 damage to, you could potentially kill 2 between 2 phases, right? You deploy it, you then go ahead and take initiative, you attack with it, and you've killed 2 units with it. The only thing that I'm a little bit sad about this is that it doesn't hit space units, but if it did, this card would be really good. But I do think it has some really big potential in Jabba the Hutt decks. And even outside of that, I could see like 2 reinforcement walkers, 1 Jabba's Rancor, for example, because Jabba's Rancor does do some nice stuff in specific scenarios. I just think reinforcement walker is generally a little bit more powerful. Next up, we have a villainy event here at 3 cost. No bargain. Each opponent discards a card from their hand and you draw a card. I'll say this, as a lot of people are talking about this art. I will say this is one of those cards where the art kind of doesn't look right to me. But regardless on that one, this one looks kind of interesting. If you think about kind of the 3 resource card manipulation cards, you think Mission Briefing, for example, at 4 costs, you have Pillage. Mission Briefing allows you to draw 2 cards. The Pillaged allows your opponent to discard, or forces your opponent to discard 2 cards. This is kind of the middle ground, right? You discard, or you draw a card, your opponent discards a card. I could see this actually being a card that I'd want to play in my more mid-rangey control decks as a sideboard option, right? If you think about kind of that 3-drop slot, a lot of the times in control decks, that's filled with, Power of the Dark Side, I Am Your Fathers. But in a lot of situations in control matchups, if you're the control deck, you don't want your opponent to draw 3 cards. You just let your unit die. And in this case, you do get card advantage from No Bargain, and it actually limits your opponent's options, which can be pretty powerful in control matchups. So this card, I actually could see being, a 2-3 of in a sideboard option in control mirrors. I think this card actually does have some potential. If you're looking at like more aggressive style of decks, or potentially even mid-range decks against aggressive style decks, or against other mid-range decks, I don't think this card really has a place as 3 resources to essentially go up on 1 card from your opponent. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, but maybe we'll see it. I just think this is more of a control mirror type of card, as it's cheap and actually guarantees you a little bit of card advantage. Next up, we have a card that I am exceptionally excited for, and something that's going to kind of finish the deal on double red variants. This is a 2-costed ground unit, Bo-Katan Kryze, double aggression, 3/3 Mandalorian Trooper. When defeated for each player with 15 or more damage on their base, draw a card. Really, really good stuff, okay? This, I've been talking about double red Sabine for the longest time. Of course, this could also be in like double red Bo-Katan, but to me, double red Sabine makes way more sense. We've seen so many different direct damage events, upgrades over the course of the last few days, including the double red event that deals damage equal to the number of cards you have in hand. That one is really, really insane. And then that, in addition to For a Cause, you have Saw Gerrera. You have all these things that kind of just deal direct damage. And so when this comes down on 2 resources, it's going to be a 2-resource 3/3. That's insane. Okay, that is the best stat line that you can really hope for without any sort of bounty associated with it. Like, Dr. Evazad's a 3/3 shielded, yes, but outside of like a huge bounty, a 3/3 for 2 is like as good as we get, so that's amazing. Very happy about that. And the double red decks are the decks that are actually struggling the most for these high quality units, as you're playing things like Rebel Pathfinder in your 2-drop slot, which is honestly a lot weaker than something like, you know, a Battlefield Marine or, you know, an A-Wing. You really want a 3-powered unit on turn 1 in order for you to close out the game a little bit stronger, right? And this one, not only are you getting a 3-powered 2-resource drop, which can come down early, but if this comes down a little bit later, unlike Battlefield Marine, who comes down on turn 5, turn 6 sometimes, and doesn't really, you know, I guess, be all that relevant, this one can draw you into more burn events, burn upgrades, like the 2 double resource event that I talked about, or the Four Causes, or the Sagruras, or another card that we're going to talk about in just a moment. And this is what's way more exciting. And I do think it's mainly for Sabine, because the 1 damage guaranteed from Sabine is a lot more appealing than Bo-Katan's ability. Also, Sabine comes down a lot earlier than Bo-Katan, which makes her more appealing, because again, if you're playing the more aggressive burn deck, right, you could potentially get that 15 damage on their base really quickly, and Bo-Katan can come down turn 3, turn 4, and then if they end up killing her, boom, you draw into more burn spells, which is really, really nice. So this card looks really good, and I'm very excited for double red Sabine in this next set. On to the next one here, we have a double Vigilance card in Sugi, a 4-costed ground unit, 4/6 Underworld Bounty Hunter. While an enemy unit is upgraded, this unit gains Sentinel, and we have a smuggle cost for 6 and single Vigilance, so you do not need double Vigilance here. This one is a really nice statted units, right? If you look at kind of the stats that I was talking about for 4-costed units, the kind of above average stat line is 9 points of stats, so a 4/5 is usually what we see, like Kanan. There are even 8 points of stats playable units like K2SO, 4/4, or Gamorrean Guards, another 4/4, right? And all of those have some relevant ability. Like Gamorrean Guards gives you Sentinel, and it is just one of the only 4 drops in Cunning. And then, you know, your K2SOs is a burn spell, which is super, super nice. All of that's great, but this is a 4/6, which allows you to basically outstat a lot of different units that come down, and can potentially trade with, you know, multiple different units. Like if you play like a Battlefield Marine into like an Ezra or something, this has a really good chance of killing multiple units and surviving, which can be potentially really, really strong. Okay, but if you compare it to other 4-drops, it will probably just trade into it over the course of time. But the 6th point of stats in terms of toughness is really relevant, especially for something like I talked about the other day, Mercenary Company, which is a 5-resource or a 4-resource 5/5. And Kanan just straight up dies to that. So the 6th point of toughness is really relevant. And the Sentinel is nice. It's probably not going to be all that relevant unless you're fighting those upgrade decks. But there are some situations, like if you're fighting Sabine Green, for example, you can definitely see some random experience tokens out there. And this just gets a 4/6 Sentinel. That could be pretty nice. I think all of this lends itself to be a pretty nice option for the random, you know, double Vigilance decks that are looking to play a little bit more Sentinels, like a Childson on 4. I think this can come down also in these upgraded or upgrade focused decks, just stall out the game a little bit more. I don't think the smuggle cost looks that appealing, but of course, you know, if you smuggle it early, that could potentially be a free play later on. So that is quite nice. Next up, we have a 0-costed event, a cunning event. Look the other way. Exhaust unit unless its controller pays 2. So this one's a little bit interesting, and this is probably one of those cards where we're going to have to play around with more to really see its impact, as a lot of these cards you can kind of see, okay, obviously 4-Lum and Zuckuss are going to be playing in Boba Fett, and they're obviously going to be good. Like we've already seen 4-resource ambush 4/4s be good, and that's probably going to be the same. But this card, here's what I see as the best case scenario for this card. Your opponent plays their units, they play a couple things, they get their Bobo flip turn, they have 1 resource, they're trying to ready 2 more, so they can play their Bodhi or whatever else, right? And then you go look the other way, and you exhaust their leader. Boom. And you can apply this to any leader, right? Your opponent plays their Sabine, they get down their K2SO, ECL'd out because they want to deal with a unit, they get their Sabine down, and they're about to attack with it, and you exhaust Sabine. Cool. That's not particularly amazing, unless you're getting something super high quality like a Boba Fett, as I mentioned, right? Because assuming your opponent has no more resources and has already attacked with things, right? Then your opponent can just take initiative, which is a big downside. And you can't really do this at the beginning of a turn because your opponent can just pay 2. I suppose that could be an advantage, as you just disrupt your opponent's tempo for 0 resources. You essentially exhaust 2 of their resources because your opponent wants to attack. And that could be good enough, especially in the aggro decks, right? Like if I'm starting out my turn and I see them have like an A-Wing and it's turn 2, and I know they're going to go Wing Leader on their A-Wing and attack me for 5. And you could just go look the other way at the beginning of the turn, and they pay 2, so they can't deploy their Wing Leader. And then they just get in for 3, and you disrupted their turn for 0 resources. Or they play their Wing Leader because they have initiative, and you just exhaust their A-Wing to save 5 damage. It's a 0 resource event that essentially gains you 5 life. That's pretty nice, right? So I could see some like pretty interesting scenarios with this. I think this is definitely an interesting mind game card, and definitely a card where you're gonna have to evaluate game state extensively before you play this and figure out whether or not it's worth it. But yeah, this one's one of those cards where, because it's 0 resources, I definitely think that it has some potential. We've seen how powerful something like Metal Ceremony is, even though it's generally not a very powerful card unless you can really flood the board and get in a lot of attacks, which you normally can't. But because it's 0 resources, it's almost always going to be something that you can get some value out of, and maybe look the other way is very similar. Next up, we have a 1 resource ground unit in Command Villainy, Salacious Crumb, a 1/3 underworld creature. When played, you heal damage from your base, and you have an action to exhaust this, return this unit to its owner's hand, and deal 1 damage to a ground unit. So a very powerful card in terms of utility if you're able to continuously action it up. But I think this card's very, very weak. Let me talk about why. So on turn 1, which is usually when you want to play your 1-drops, you're not going to be able to get the when played trigger most often because you're not going to have any damage on your base. And then you have a 1/3. The 1/3 stat line is pretty weak and will die to even some 2 resource plays or even 1 resource plays, although that can potentially trade. So there is some advantage there. But then you have the action. If this was just an action to where you can return this to its owner's hand without exhausting it, this would be way more exciting, right? You can play it, heal damage, action, bounce it, deal 1 damage, play it, heal 1 damage, action, bounce it, deal 1 damage. That would probably be maybe even a little bit too strong. But when you get a little bit later on, your opponent can just kill it when it comes down. So the problem with this is turn 1, you play Salacious Crumb. You don't heal any damage. You don't action it. Turn 2, you can bounce it and you deal 1 damage to a unit, which is probably not that great unless they have some sort of like Greedo or something that can just die straight up for 1 damage. This card, I think, could potentially have some sideboard implications, especially if you know your opponent's playing Greedos and Death Star Stormtroopers. You just straight up play this on turn 1, and you hope that they have a Death Star Stormtrooper or Greedo, and you mess them up. That can be relevant. And of course, you could bounce it and then resource it later on, which can be nice too. But I don't think this card is particularly strong. So we'll see, but not super excited for it. Next up, we got another card for double red, Sabine, as I mentioned earlier. I'll leave a link to this video down below. I apologize. I'm not going to attempt to say that name because I probably will butcher it. But we have a 1-costed event in Aggression, Daring Raid, deal 2 damage to a unit or base. So obviously, you can just do straight up 2 damage to a unit, which can be pretty relevant, right? 1 resource to deal 2 damage. This can kill things like Lethal Insurgent. It can kill things like Viper Probe Droid. It can kill things like Ketsuonyo, like lots of different options to kill things, even a Cobb Vanth, for example. But the more interesting part to this is actually creating a full-on burn deck and having Daring Raid, having things like the Smuggle unit that allows you to play it from the resource pile to deal 1 damage to a base, having Sabine action, having the 3-costed deal damage equal to your cards in hand, having 4 causes, having Saw Gerreras, and then having some really efficient units to deal in a little bit of damage. It reminds me of Burn in Magic, where you have very few units but very high quality units to really get in early damage and then finishing out the game with a bunch of burn, and that can potentially happen now with all these different things that can actually hit the base. And with Bo-Katan here, a 2-resource 3/3 that can potentially draw you into more burn cards, this looks really powerful, and I'm really excited for double red Sabine coming next set. We also have the Arquintan's Assault Carrier Cruiser. Wow. 8-resource space unit in command. It's a 7/8 vehicle capital ship with ambush, and when this unit attacks, it defeats a non-leader unit. Put the defeated unit into play as a resource under your control. So it's essentially an 8-resource 7/8 ambushing resupply, which is pretty cool. But here's the thing with this card. If you look at the other capital ships or cards that you could play around 8 resources, This is pretty average stat line. And the one I like to compare, as I mentioned previously, is Reinforcement Walker. Now, the difference between this is Reinforcement Walker does not kill a unit when it comes down. Instead, it just heals. This instead kills a unit, and if it does, it's going to give you a resupply. Now, the resupply on 8 resources can bring you up to like Devastator resources, but to be honest, getting up to 8, 9 resources, all kind of the same. Like, getting up to Devastator mana, I don't think is really all that relevant. So the fact that this gives you a resupply when it kills something doesn't really get me all that excited. The thing that's exciting about this card is if it's able to kill something, then it's pretty strong. If your opponent plays a Fet's Fire Spray on Fire Spray on 6, and you happen to have Super Laser Tech resupplied price on your head before that, so you're on 7 resources when they play it, you take initiative, and then the next turn you are Quinton's Assault Carrier it, or Assault Cruiser it, that can be pretty interesting. If they don't have a space unit to ambush, this card is pretty bad. I would significantly rather have a Reinforcement Walker or any other 8 resource play like a Home 1, or even some 7 resource player like Darth Vader, Maul, etc, etc, etc. It's all about whether your opponent's in space and they have a high quality space unit to take out, such as a Fet's Fire Spray, or maybe a Come Next Set Marauder, or something like that that you could really deal with in the space arena. So if that's the case, I think this card could be pretty good. If you don't have a space unit, obviously the ability doesn't work, the ambush doesn't work, it's just a 7-8 for 8 resources, which is really, really mediocre overall. So we'll have to see. Next up, we have a couple of Vigilance cards here. Evidence of the Crime, a 3 resource event with the ability to take control of an upgrade that it costs 3 or less and attach it to an eligible unit of your choice. Now, I want to mention this art is sweet. I think this is the first time we've seen Ahsoka in the art of a card. Ahsoka is my second favorite character in all of Star Wars after Revan, for those of you that want that little piece of information. So I just want to say this is a sweet art. It's part of the Ahsoka getting blamed for the destruction of the Jedi Temple, or the bombing of the Jedi Temple in that arc of Clone Wars. But this is a sweet, sweet card. Anyways, this is a really powerful sideboard card. Now, of course, this is a card you do not want to play in your control deck, because if you read it, it says take control of an upgrade and attach it to an eligible unit of your choice, which means if you don't have a unit, you have to attach it to their unit. So control decks, whatever, not that exciting to just move an upgrade around on your opponent's side of the battlefield, right? However, if you are playing an aggressive mid-range deck, something like that, or an upgrade style of deck, and you have this in your sideboard, and you bring it in against upgrade focused strategies, this is an absolute game changer. Just think about what this does in, for example, right now in our meta. Let's say you're playing Chirrut Red, your opponent's playing Chirrut Red. This is the upgrade deck that is kind of the main upgrade deck of the format. You go, play your unit, play a Yoda, and your opponent plays a Yoda. And then they take initiative, or let's say they play a Yoda, then you play a Yoda. They take initiative, and then you pass, because that's your turn 2. Turn 3, your opponent goes Jedi Lightsaber on Yoda. And you're like, oh dang, I better have my own Jedi Lightsaber. Or, even better, I just play Evidence of the Crime. And not only do you get a Jedi Lightsaber, but then you get to steal your opponent's Jedi Lightsaber off of it. So the result is, let's say you would have had a Jedi Lightsaber, then you would have given +3/+3 to your Yoda, and they would have +3/+3 to their Yoda, and they get a 5/7, and you have a 5/7, and you get to attack into each other. However, because, the Jedi Lightsaber, they get to attack first, so they potentially can go ahead and get additional damage into their base, or into your Yoda if they wanted to do that. Instead, what ends up happening here is that they have a 2/4 and you have a 5/7. That's crazy. So this is extremely exciting for those types of matchups, but I think it's mainly a sideboard card, because if you're playing this and you're getting a random experience token off your opponent's unit, that's not really that exciting. And I think on average, that's what it's going to be, is you're going to get a random experience token or shield token instead of like a Luke's lightsaber or a Jedi lightsaber or a Fallen lightsaber. If you get one of those, it's way more exciting. If you don't, then of course, Evidence of the Crime is pretty mediocre. So I'm thinking this is way more of a sideboard card. And here's the exception to this, is if set 2 is prominent with upgrades, maybe this is a main deckable card, like a 1 to 2 amount, similar to how Traitorous is a main deckable card, but there are some decks that the card's really bad against, and you just side it out, just as any deck. This could potentially be a main deck card, but mainly a sideboard option. Next up, we have a 5-costed ground unit in command or Vigilance villainy. Super Commando Squad. It's a 4/4 Imperial Mandalorian Trooper with shielded, and if this is upgraded, it gains Sentinel. So this one's pretty interesting because it's going to be upgraded when it's played, which means it's a 4/4 for 5 shielded Sentinel unit, right? When it comes down. That's really powerful. Yes, it's a 5 resource 4/4, which is a very poor stat line for a 5 mana play or 5 resource play. You're really looking for like a 5/6 or a 6/6. That's like ideal. That's like really solid. But a 4/4 is way below stat line. However, it's a shielded Sentinel, which means if your opponent had played a 4-drop before and they're going to try to attack, you drop a Super Commando Squad, they must attack into the shielded Sentinel, and it will trade with whatever unit they played before. So your 5-drop is trading with their 4-drop, and in some cases, right, it may actually trade with multiple of your opponent's units, because let's say your opponent's like, oh, I don't want to trade my 4-drop with your 5-drop. That doesn't seem super exciting because I'm the aggressive deck. I need to get in some damage. So I'm going to attack with my lower, cost in unit. This could probably just kill it straight up. Like if they attack with a Sabine, they will just, get their Sabine killed. If they attack with Battlefield Marine, they'll get their Battlefield Marine killed, etc., etc., etc. And so this actually looks a decent card. Not exciting by any means, but somewhat decent. That could potentially be played in more mid-range / controlling decks as a 4/4 shielded Sentinel. Next up, guys, we have the new leader. And we have a lot more cards to talk about, so don't go away, guys, yet. This is a Jabba the Hutt leader. Command villainy. Action, choose a unit for this phase. It gains bounty. The next unit you play this phase costs 1 less. And then his epic action is 7 to flip, and it becomes a 2/12. When deployed, another unit captures an enemy non-leader unit, and he has an action. Instead of the bounty giving you 1 less, it gives you 2 less. So let's consider this with Jabba's Rancor for just a moment, okay? It's an 8 resource 9/9 that becomes a 7 resource 9/9 because of Jabba the Hutt. And then with the bounty, if you kill something, it becomes a 6 resource 9/9. 6 resource 9/9 is absolutely crazy. That also deals 3 damage to something when it comes down. That is really, really powerful. And if you look at just command villainy, guys, remember you have to kill the unit that you put the bounty on, otherwise you can't get the 1 less. So you can't really do this on like turn 1 where you go turn 1 Super Laser Technician. That's not really what's going to happen. But you can go, turn 1 Viper Probe Droid, or turn 1 Dr. Evazan, or turn 1 Seasoned Shore Trooper. Usually want a 3-power drop on turn 1 because that's going to give you the highest likelihood to kill something. Let's say you go turn 1 Viper Probe Droid. Turn 2, you take initiative. Turn 2, you go bounty on your unit. And then you kill their unit. You can play a 4-drop. That's pretty nice, okay? That's pretty nice. And that really does some major stuff for your curves because you get to accelerate into a lot of different stuff. And seeing as this is command villainy with ramp and be able to play big units, right? Because that's kind of what green ramp does. You can play things like Darth Vader, for example, on 6 resources. Or just play a bunch of ambush cards like Maul to get the bounty claimed, etc. This does lend itself to do some really, really fun stuff. And then when you deploy, it's a 2/12, right? 2/12 means it's basically never going to die. However, I don't like the 2/12 stat line. If you look at other 7 resource to deploy leaders, I'm looking at like Darth Vader, which is a 5/8. And if you look at the 5/8 stat line, you get 13 points of stats. And technically this gets you 5 points or a 1 point of stat extra because it's 14 points of stats. But because the power is so low, you really aren't going to be able to trade with anything. I much prefer something like Emperor Palpatine, which is a 4/10. Why? Because he's actually able to kill some of the earlier cost units or cheaper units to actually allow you to stabilize. And Jabba can't necessarily do that, but you do get to guarantee capture something, assuming you have another unit on the battlefield, which actually can be pretty relevant. And the action requires you to exhaust Jabba, so the idea is that you're not going to be attacking with it. You're just going to be trying to play a bunch of expensive units for cheap. And you can actually go deploy Jabba after you deploy Jabba's Rancor, and then next phase, you action one of their units, and then you kill it with Jabba's Rancor, and you can play a Devastator, which is pretty insane, right? So I think this unit, this leader actually does have some really, really powerful stuff going on. It's just a matter of, can we play the proper units to actually take advantage of the bounties, right? Because if you're not, then he's a pretty weak leader, right? But if you are, you get a guaranteed ability to reduce the costs of your plays, which is really relevant when you're playing green because you're already trying to ramp anyways, right? Just for example, let's say you go turn 1 price on your head, right? Which could be pretty nice. And you're playing double green, so you have ECL, which I think could potentially be a strategy with this. So you go turn 1 price on your head, and then turn 2, you action, so you bounty something, right? And then you're playing green red. And so turn 2, you can play some sort of, let's say, 2-drop. And you go ahead and ECL something out, you kill it, you get a resource, and then you can play another 2-drop. Or even better, you can go, as I mentioned, green red, and you deploy like a Django, which can claim bounties. So you can get a 6/6 overwhelm whenever you want. That could be pretty nice, right? There's a lot of different synergies, especially with things with bounty. And when you're playing bounties on your units or enemy units, for example, Mercenary Company, that's a 2-resource 3/4, right? Is it 2-resource 3/4? I have to remember now. Let me pull this up. So Mercenary Company, I believe, is the 3/4 that can be played for 1 cheaper. No. Mercenary Company is the one. Oh man, what is the card that gets reduced by 1 cost if your opponent has a bounty? Stuff like that is way more exciting. Reputable Hunter. Here we go. Check this out. This is a 2-resource 3/4, just straight up, because you get to just action out a bounty immediately, and boom, 1 less to play. So this is a 2-resource 3/4 in Java decks. That is quite crazy. Okay, and that could be some pretty exciting stuff, right? So maybe if there's more synergies like that, Jabba becomes even stronger. I don't know, but this leader does look pretty powerful. Next up, we have Hutt's Henchman. It's a 4-resource ground unit, 3/4 shielded, pretty standard, pretty straightforward. This one, not super exciting. We've seen like 2/4 shielded on 3 resources, and that hasn't really done anything. A 3/4 shielded, also pretty weak. Yes, in some cases, it'll be able to trade with things that are 3/3s or 2/3s or whatever coming down earlier. But a 3/4 shielded, generally just not enough stat points to actually become a lot of, I guess a threat on the board for the most part. There are some situations where this will be good, but there will also be a lot of situations where, a 3-resource play is going to have 5 points of power or toughness. So you have to attack it twice for this to kill it. And that's just a lot less exciting than playing like a 4-resource 5/5, which you can, or a 4-resource 4/4, which has a really relevant ability rather than having shielded. Overall, this does not look exciting to me at all. So not very high on this one. However, we also have Val, a 2-resource ground unit, okay, with a 2/4 stat line, with bounty, deal 3 damage to a unit, and when defeated, give 2 experience tokens to a friendly unit. That's crazy. And it mentions this because this is pretty relevant. The active player chooses the order of Val's ability. So what this does is your opponent kills this, right? And you say, okay, I'm going to let you deal 3 damage to a unit first and then give 2 experience tokens to something. This can be pretty relevant, right? Because let's say you have multiple units down on the battlefield, right? Like let's say you've played a couple different grit cards or whatever, and you're like, I'm curious what they're going to go ahead and deal 3 damage to because I might want to give the experience tokens to that. Or let's say you only have one other unit, right? Like you go turn 1 Val, turn 2 you play a unit. That way you can guarantee the experience tokens, and you say, okay, you're going to hit this other unit with 3 damage. I'm going to give 2 experience tokens to it first because it's not going to kill it, and then you deal 3 damage to it. This seems like an exceptionally powerful card. A 2/4 stat line is already quite nice on turn 1, right? That's like a 3/3, but instead of being, a little bit more aggressive, it's a little bit more defensive. So it's going to be harder to kill. And the damage to a unit is actually sometimes a benefit for you in blue because of, as I mentioned, grit cards. And giving 2 experience tokens while dealing 3 damage to it can do something like, let's say you play the 3-resource 2/4 Wookiee, and your opponent deals 3 damage to it because they have no other choice, which makes it a 5/1. But then you give 2 experience tokens, it becomes a 7/3. A 7/3, that's so much damage. So there could be some really powerful synergies in these styles of decks. And I think that you could leverage the bounty to actually be somewhat of an advantage to you in some scenarios. So I think Val is incredibly strong of a 2-drop. I do think that you're going to have units, because if you just end up killing this, then you don't get to have the experience tokens. And in some cases, if you play a weaker unit, then the deal 3 damage is just going to be too powerful for your opponent to take advantage of. But you get to choose the order of the abilities, and you get to choose how to build your deck. So I think you could build a deck to leverage Val. Next up, and this is the, I think, last cards we have to talk about. There are some leaked cards, right? Leaked cards in the Reddit here from the recent, kind of introduction of set 2. And these cards have not been spoiled yet, but they're kind of already out there because of, well, the fact that people are opening set 2 and we have the cards out in the open. So first one, we have DJ, a 3 resource ground unit, 3/5. And this says when played, it also has smuggle for 7 resources and double cunning. When played using smuggle, take control of an enemy resource that when this unit leaves play, that resource's owner takes control of it. So 3 resource, 3/5, pretty nice stat line, right? That's pretty reasonable. Pretty excited about that. The 7 resource smuggle part of this with double cunning is very hard to pull off, right? And even if you're doing it, if you think about what cunning wants to do, cunning wants to get down early, get in some damage, and get some early game advantages for late game loss. And DJ here with the smuggle ability isn't really all that exciting. Like, yeah, you get to take control of 1 enemy resource, but it's a 3/5 now on turn 6 probably. And that means that your opponent could probably just kill it, get the resource back, and you've spent 7 resources on a 3/5. Like, that's not really all that exciting, because they have probably stronger units to actually just straight up kill DJ. So I'm not really impressed with the smuggle option of this, and I don't really see this guy being all that great. It is a legendary, which is something to consider, but not super exciting for me. Next one up, we have Enforced Loyalty, a 2 resource double command event. You get to defeat a friendly unit. If you do, draw 2 cards. This one's pretty nice, especially if you have some really cheap units. However, this isn't really going to be all that great in most scenarios, right? Because if you think about it, if you play like a Death Star Stormtrooper, for example, which you can't even do necessarily in double green, but let's say you play a 1 resource play, and then you play Enforced Loyalty. Well, you've spent 3 resources and 2 cards to draw 2 cards. Is that really all that good? Not really. This, I think, really comes into play maybe when your opponent has dealt a decent amount of damage to a unit, and then you want to cash it in for a couple of cards. You've already traded with it, or dealt damage to something, and your opponent's gonna, like, I don't know, Sabine ping it or something, and it's just gonna straight up die to something on the battlefield. That's where Enforced Loyalty might come in handy, but I think this card's pretty bad. It's just kind of interesting, right? Next up, we have a couple of showcases. This guy's kind of insane. Whoever opened these packs got insanely lucky because we have a Cad Bane showcase. Absolutely sweet looking. I think there's a flip side here as well. What a sweet looking card. We also have a Ray showcase. I mentioned this earlier on the sleeves. We did see kind of a spoiler of this. We also have a Bosk showcase, and look at how many cards he's got. This guy got so ridiculously lucky. Look, there's a Remote Village here. Looks like there's a Cargo Juggernaut coming back in for a reprint. You can see a Supreme Leader Snoke back there. Top target. It looks like back there there's also a Borderless Let the Wookiee Win, and some other stuff going on. But wow, 3 showcases. I don't know how many packs he opened, but crazy stuff. Next up, we have Imprisoned, a 2 resource upgrade in Vigilance attached to a non-leader unit. Attached unit loses its current abilities and can't gain abilities. This one's kind of interesting. Also, the art on this, that's Maro Eval. It looks like from I think that's Maro Eval. That's like kind of the scene that shows him with the box and stuff, where Obi-Wan goes ahead and sneaks into the kind of bounty hunter crew to assassinate the Chancellor and all that stuff. Really cool Clone Wars arc. Anyways, this one I'm not super excited about. Paying 2 resources to permanently allow something to lose abilities or force something to lose abilities is all kind of mediocre. I suppose this could be used as somewhat of a removal spell, right? Like, let's say they play an A-Wing and you play Imprisoned. Suddenly, it's a 1/3. Like, that can do some work, right? Or they play, I don't know, whatever unit they play that's relevant in terms of abilities, and you play this. Like, raid units in particular, I think this could be somewhat useful, and you could see some value in it. But overall, I don't really see this being worth a card slot. Unlike Entrenched, it just straight up doesn't let them, actually attack your base. And Prison doesn't like remove their power and toughness, so that's something that is pretty weak. Next up and last, we have Mystic Reflection. This is a 1 resource event in Vigilance Heroism. Give an enemy unit -2/-0 for this phase. If you control a force unit, give the enemy unit -2/-2 for this phase. So this to me is really powerful, but it's more of a sideboard card. I think this is kind of like a make an opening. Make an opening can be really good. It can also be pretty bad, right? In a lot of scenarios, make an opening just doesn't kill anything. At least you get the heal factor of that. This doesn't give you the heal too. So it's not even going to give you kind of the option to do some major work in buffering your HP. Yes, it'll give you the -2/-2, but in most scenarios, I'd rather just play a make an opening, even if you have force units, right? And if you don't, it's just a really bad disarm. So really, you need a force unit for this to work, and you need to have a force unit, and you need to have something to kill for this to be really strong. So I think that this has a lot of situational aspects to where it's only a sideboard card, and even if it is a sideboard card, you need enough force units to make this work. And we're forced in Heroism Vigilance, which does have some force units, right? Like Yoda. It has Kanan. It has all these different options in Vigilance Heroism. You even have like Chariot if you want to deploy that. And I could see it potentially being played there. But to be honest, again, I think this is more of a sideboard card and doesn't really kind of get me excited about playing it in a main deck of a lot of different decks that have force unit synergies. But that's going to be the end of the spoilers today. There's going to be more cards, I'm sure, more spoilers and leaked cards, I'm sure. We are getting close to the end of spoiler season. I believe there's only like 40 cards left to actually spoil in the set. And if you look down here, guys, you can see there's 262 total cards. So we've gone through about 220 of the cards so far. So there's only a small portion left, and lots of rares, lots of legendaries, as you see, because they didn't spoil them early. So hopefully we'll see a lot more of that. But this has been pretty cool. The card I'm most excited about, I have to say, has probably been Frozen in Carbonite of this little spoiler session. I think Frozen in Carbonite's an insane removal spell. Alongside that, I think Bo-Katan with the burn spell here, the Daring Raid. I'm excited to build a double red Sabine deck. Evidence of the Crime looks like a sweet sideboard card. Jabba looks like an amazing leader. Val looks like an absolute sick 2-drop with a grit style of deck. And then, of course, the showcases over here, guys. Woo, baby, those look really, really cool. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below, guys. Hopefully you enjoy. That's been a lot of cards today. I hope there's going to be a bunch more tomorrow, and I'll see you all for the next one.